All right, I am feeling under the weather today, so I'm not going into the office. I'm just going to record this at home. The Moon Knight trailer looks cool, right? It looks really, 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 really cool. Here's a funny thing about this, is it's leaving everybody baffled, right? For those of you guys who are familiar with Comics Explained, we'll do a video on Arthur Harrow. It's kind of strange because everywhere I've looked, it's like Ethan Hawke is playing Randall Spector, and then the subtitles for the trailer identify him as Arthur Harrow. So I guess he's playing Arthur Harrow. And of course, he also said his character was based off David Koresh. In this video, I'll give you guys some real life history on David Koresh, right? Because the whole event surrounding him and like the siege on Waco and all that kind of stuff is absolutely crazy, right? But let's talk about this trailer. Let's do a trailer breakdown first, right? So as you go through the trailer, the funny thing about this, there's not a whole lot to go on here, right? The trailer is pretty straightforward, but it does give us some pretty cool concepts, right? So Mark Spector, at least when we're introduced to him, or at least the Steve Grant persona, that he appears to be an employee of a museum instead of him having a mercenary past. Maybe he does, right? At the 36-second mark, it looks like he's basically standing behind a bank of cash registers, right? When the woman's telling him like he's useless and things like that. So he's a guy that seems to lack confidence, doesn't really know his own self-worth and that kind of a thing. And he presents the Steve Grant identity to her. Now, in Marvel Comics, Steve Grant is one of the identities of Mark Spector, right? A lot of people refer to Mark Spector as like Marvel's version of Batman, and in a lot of way he is, right? I mean, he's almost identical to Batman, but the big difference between him is that Mark Spector got lost in his personalities and Batman did not, right? So talking about Batman here for a second, there's more to the Batman mythos than just Bruce Wayne running around and beating up people in the middle of the night. That he's actually got several identities that allow him to serve the purpose of attacking crime from different ways. So you have Bruce Wayne, of course, the actual identity of this guy, right? He's the super rich dude from the Wayne family, and he uses his money for charitable goals and tries to help Gotham from a financial side. But it also allows him to keep his eye on white collar crime, right? It's people who are super rich and are breaking the law. And then of course he appears to them as Batman, probably beats them up a little bit, smacks them around, and then hands them over to the cops or tells them to change their ways or something like that. Then there's Matches Malone, and that's an identity that most of you guys who have never read Batman have probably never heard of. Matches Malone is the street level identity of Bruce Wayne. If he wants to like infiltrate a criminal underground network or something like that, he'll appear as Matches Malone and then get the information he needs, and then suddenly Batman will show up and like just start beating the crap out of everybody, you know, just different things like that. With Mark Spector, it's almost the exact same way. Steve Grant is the billionaire persona of Mark Spector, and a lot of that's just the result of money he's saved up over the years that he's made as a mercenary, things like that he's invested and just made himself super rich. But the Steve Grant persona allows him to basically know what's going on in the white collar world when it comes to crime. It also allows him access to resources and things like that he wouldn't normally be able to get. Then you have Jake Lockley. Jake Lockley is the cab driver persona, right? That he's basically the identity that Mark Spector uses to know what's going on the ground level. And then you have Mark Spector, the mercenary. That's who Moon Knight was before he became Moon Knight, right? Just a guy with a history of military training and so on, who basically turned his skills into becoming a soldier of fortune, right? That sort of thing. And so once he was injured and left for dead by Raoul Bushman and taken before the statue of Khonshu, then Khonshu in turn said, become my avatar on Earth and I will basically resurrect you. And Mark Spector said, okay. And then Mark Spector developed the Moon Knight persona for himself. And then after developing the Moon Knight persona, developed the identities of Steve Grant and Jake Lockley, right? So that's kind of how his personalities work in unison. But there is a moment in the trailer when, of course, the Moon Knight persona basically stares back at Mark Spector or Steve Grant, or whatever personality we want to go with, right? So him just kind of seeing that out there. Khonshu does appear in the hallway. And of course, again, we'll kind of circle back to all these points here in a little bit in terms of what they mean. And then near the end of the trailer, Moon Knight's beating up what looks like Werewolf by Night. I don't know if you guys noticed that. It's obviously way too big to be a person, right? I mean, if that's a person, that person is like 7 feet tall, right? So maybe Moon Knight's just beating up a basketball player, who knows? But it looks like Werewolf by Night, to be honest with you guys. Now, that also makes sense because for the most part, when it comes to things like werewolves, vampires, stuff like that, those are the natural enemies of Khonshu. So for those of you guys who don't know how this works, Khonshu is the god of the moon, right? He's a moon god. He's one of many gods that exist out there. But the enemy of Khonshu is anybody who would hunt down and attack people in the night, right? Werewolf by night, vampires, things like that. They are the mortal enemies of Khonshu. And as an extension of Khonshu being his avatar on Earth, they are the mortal enemies of Moon Knight. Now, a lot of that changed in terms of the affiliation of like the Midnight Suns, basically Moon Knight working alongside what were in effect his mortal enemies in order to achieve a greater goal, different things along those lines. It's very, very fast and loose in terms of who Moon Knight considers to be an enemy and who he considers to be a good guy, that it's not really as heavy-handed as how Khonshu puts it, that anybody who's a werewolf is a bad guy, anybody who's a vampire is a bad guy. Instead, Moon Knight bases that largely on how he interacts with them, right? Like, are they vampires that try to kill people? Then they're bad guys. Are they vampires that try to do good things? Then they're not bad guys, i.e. that's why he's friends with Blade. I guess maybe friends is a very, very strong term. The important thing is that looking over the entirety of this trailer, you know what this show reminds me of? It reminds me of Legion, right? For those of you guys who never watched Legion on FX, that show, the first season anyway, it really begged the question, is what's happening real? Is any of it real? Or is it really just Legion dealing with a combination of having, well, I guess it's dissociative identity disorder. People were getting all bent out of shape because I called it multiple personality disorder. In any event, is it really a result of Legion having multiple personalities combined with schizophrenia, the inability to distinguish reality from fantasy, or is it actually happening? What this trailer looks like as far as the show goes is it looks like we're just jumping straight into it, right? Like we're not really getting your standard fare of the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, right? Whereas once upon a time, there was a guy named Mark Spector who was in the military, and then once he got out, he started becoming a soldier of fortune, and then was basically ambushed and left for dead by what he thought was his business partner, and then he was taken before the statue of the moon god Khonshu, who promised to bring him back to life if he would operate as Khonshu's avatar on Earth. And now we are here at the continuation of the story, right? It's not following that kind of linear path, which is very much refreshing. What it looks like is it looks like we just pick up with one of the personas as it's sort of navigating the life of what is in effect Mark Spector, and we are learning about the other personalities in the mind of Mark Spector as Mark Spector is learning about them as well, right? So literally, we're figuring it out as he's figuring it out. So that's why you see things where like he basically ends up grabbing that phone that was essentially hidden away and he didn't know it was there. It says unknown number. He doesn't understand why that person calls him Mark, when as far as he's concerned, his name is Steve Grant. Because one of the things to understand is that more often than not, at least the way that Marvel depicts the alternate personalities of Moon Knight, that the other personalities are not really aware of any of the other personalities. They can be to a degree, but by the time this whole thing of having multiple personalities took over, that like Jake Lockley didn't really know about Steve Grant, and Steve Grant didn't really know about Jake Lockley, and Mark Spector seemingly didn't know about either, or at least if he did, he would simply just kind of black out for a while and then come back, that sort of a thing. All that came to a head in Jeff Lemire's run, when basically Mark Spector ended up bringing all those personalities together and forcing them to confront each other, essentially retaking control of his mind. It was a really, really, really cool story. But that looks like is you know what's going on here. That we're basically just kind of being thrown into this TV show in the midst of just the middle of everything, right? Like Mark Spector figuring out that he's basically got multiple personalities, and each one of these personalities has an identity of its own that basically seems to operate absent of any of the other personalities. They don't know who they are. He just kind of blacks out for a period of time, like when it looks like he's driving the vehicle, and suddenly just comes to and he's got a gun in his hand. He's like, what the hell's going on? Right? Like that kind of a thing. So again, it's really, really curious. Now, in terms of Arthur Harrow, right? In terms of Ethan Hawke, I mean, it's weird that they pick Arthur Harrow, right? This guy appeared in what is it, Moon Knight Volume 2. So technically, it was Moon Knight: The Fist of Khonshu storyline. And it was really like a 6-issue miniseries. So I don't know if I'd really call it like a full volume. But Arthur Harrow appeared in that, right? He was in like issue number 2, and he was there for just a single story, right? Like that was it, right? He was there for like a single story arc, and there wasn't really anything going on besides that. And so it's a little strange to see them go in that direction. I mean, it does allow them to kind of take the character in any direction they want to. As you guys know from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of the things they love to do is take ridiculously obscure characters that nobody really knows anything about and that nobody really cares anything about, and then just rework that character into their own vision, which is a lot easier to do with somebody who appeared in one comic versus someone like Captain America, right? I mean, if the Marvel Cinematic Universe had launched and like Steve Rogers was actually a kid who was bitten by a radioactive spider father, and then lost his Uncle Ben, and then lost his girlfriend, all that kind of stuff, it'd be kind of like, okay, this is a little weird, right? But if you take somebody like Arthur Harrow that very, very, very few people have ever heard of, and you rework them, nobody's gonna care, right? It's not really gonna matter to anybody. But Ethan Hawke said that the role of Arthur Harrow was largely based on David Koresh. Now, here's the reason why this guy appears as almost a kind of cult leader, right? Because David Koresh was. So a little bit of history here. In 1992, there was a guy by the name of Larry Gilbreth, who was a UPS driver, and he was dropping a package off to a compound in Waco, Texas, and the package fell and broke open, and he realized inside this package were basically automatic assault rifles, which had been banned the year before in the assault rifles weapons ban. And so the result of this is he informed the local police, who informed the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. In turn, the ATF launched its own investigation and came to the realization that inside this compound is basically a religious sect called the Branch Davidians, which are led by a guy named David Koresh, and they were essentially stockpiling arms and armament to prepare for the end times. Not only that, David Koresh and other male members of the Branch Davidians were engaging in inappropriate actions with minors. And so ultimately the ATF received a warrant to search the premises. They tried to execute the warrant when they were fired on by the Branch Davidians. This led to the FBI intervening in what's come to be known as the Siege of Waco. Now, at the end of the Siege of Waco, which I believe was like a 52-day standoff, the FBI raided the compound, fire was set in 3 different locations, and when the smoke cleared and the shooting stopped, 76 Branch Davidian men, women, and children had died. Now, in response to the actions of the federal government at Waco, Texas, and their actions in Ruby Ridge a year before, a former member of the US military named Timothy McVeigh basically came to the conclusion that the federal government was becoming tyrannical and intended to stop this by using the federal government's own foreign policy against itself. So he filled a moving truck full of explosives, drove it to the federal building in Oklahoma City, and blew it in half. So that's the whole thing when it comes to Waco, Texas, and all that kind of stuff, right? That very much Ethan Hawke's character is based on this kind of cult leader, and really the most popular cult leader really kind of comes in twos, that it's either Jim Jones or it is David Koresh. And it'd be kind of weird if at the end of the show, Ethan Hawke feeds all of his followers Kool-Aid and they all just kill over and die. And so it makes more sense he'd be more akin to a David Koresh type character. And so the thing about this is we don't really know exactly what's going on in this show, but it does look cool. Right? The show itself does look amazing. I mean, regardless, I'm excited for it, man. Like, I'm excited for the kind of adventure because it has so much mystery and intrigue, right? I mean, one of the things that was done in the early days of the Moon Knight comics is that Mark Spector was depicted as having multiple personalities, but Marvel labeled that incorrectly as schizophrenia. But Marvel also dove into the idea that maybe everything Mark Spector is experiencing is not actually happening, that maybe he's a person that really does have schizophrenia. And that's kind of what it looks like here, right? It looks like Marvel's going with a combination of Mark Spector having different personalities inside his own head with little touches of schizophrenia here and there. For example, seeing this god Khonshu in the hallway as he's like in an elevator, right? I mean, is that actually happening or is he imagining it, right? Like, is he unable to differentiate between reality and fantasy? So let me know what you guys think down in the comments, right? Let me know how you guys feel about this trailer. Again, it was a pretty basic trailer. Not a lot of stuff to go on here, but it looks great. So we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.